Firefox Send was a good idea, even for hackers.
Hey, George, what do you have for us today?
So yeah, there's a new product, somewhat new, that Firefox created about a year ago, I think, called Firefox Send. So what this does, it gives you the ability to send files to another user, slightly larger than what you would normally send via email. So you can go up to 2.5 gig on a file. What you do is you'll upload it to the Firefox cloud, right? And it encrypts it. It offers you the ability to password protect it, and you give it a TTL. So you give it a time to live in the cloud. And it presents you with a link. And this link is good for one-time use. You provide that link to somebody, and they can download that file, encrypted, and whether you password protected it or not. And then as soon as that link is clicked and the file begins downloading, the link expires, and they remove the file, supposedly, from their repo. So this, I guess it was more of a trial than a production thing, it seemed like, because guess what, right? This is an amazing tool to use, not just for good, but for bad. And they found out that a lot of malware was being transported this way. Since the link has an expiration, the file has an expiration, a few IR teams started noticing in their logs that there were these strange-looking Firefox links, and what was happening was that two things were happening. So one, they were placing the malware in the cloud, and then when they were getting into the environment, they were downloading it from that link right onto the infected machine in the network and propagating, doing whatever they wanted to do. One of the classic malware was Earthsmith. There was somebody took a screenshot and said, "Hey, look, it looks like they used Earthsmith through Firefox Send and dropped it on one of our machines." And another thing that I don't really see it being spoken about too much was, I've seen only one article, I believe, that it was being used for possible exfil of data. And since you don't need a Firefox account to use this, if you want to send the file up to 1 gigabyte, you don't need an account. You could just generate the link and you can send it off. If you want to go up to 2.5, you need an account. But we all know accounts, they could be spoofed anyway, so it's moot point. But they did, there is a possibility of exfilling data. And you know that when they exfil data, typically if they use RAW or zip, they'll break it up into small chunks to not set off too many alarms or to make it easier for them to pull it away. In this case, 1 gigabyte, I think, is a pretty significant size, right, to pull some kind of data off of a network. And IR teams were finding it hard to track that back and to perform any kind of analysis on those links. And I think ZDNet and a few researchers got together and started noticing this malicious use of Firefox Send, and right away Firefox responded with, "We're taking the service down and we're going to implement some controls." And they admitted slightly that they said, well, this was kind of like a trial. We wanted to see how the users were accepting to it or not, and it generated a lot of traffic, it generated a lot of usage. So I find it as an interesting, very interesting that this didn't take much time for a malicious use to be found on it. And I'm very curious to see how they expect to lock this down if they do release it again. Because as far as I'm concerned, I think for exfil, this is a genius idea. Although I'm sure Firefox does some sort of logging on their end to see who pulled the file down. I don't know how privacy laws, depending on where you are, if they're allowed to disclose that data or if they even want to. But depending how big you are, maybe you'll get that data or maybe you won't. But I find it very interesting that it didn't take long for this to be used nefariously. And I'm curious to see what they're going to do to protect this, since it was sort of a successful file transfer means for big files.
It's amazing how fast adversaries adapt to new technologies emerging, sometimes much faster than IR teams who have to discover it later as something that's being used. they're going to have to learn the same lessons that pretty much every single Dropbox-like site has learned over the past years, where you can just upload any file and have somebody download it. The fact that, you know, Firefox is hosting it, I guess that's the key for incident response teams to, you know, it makes it difficult to identify suspicious activity to Firefox versus legitimate, because it's also like checking if Firefox is up to date, and there's a lot of like legitimate activity there. So I think reinforces for me even more how you have to look at your like proxy logs and make sure that you know the URI patterns that people are visiting, so you can see this type of behavior. That, hey, what are all these weird, you know, uplinks that are happening or uploads that are happening to Firefox? That shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and I think they baited on the fact that most companies allow Firefox traffic to flow, right? And I'm not sure what the exact URI is for sending one of these, but I'm sure that's actually, now that you bring that up, that could be a place where they could start. They can make it so that it's identifiable easily by proxies, and you can blacklist it, because who knows how this was appearing, right, in the proxy. Maybe it was just like a typical Firefox domain. Okay, so most proxies will let that fly.
I think another thing to consider would be around DLP, data loss protection, like thinking through, like, is your organization like legitimately using services like this and uploading stuff to the cloud, or are your employees doing that without you realizing it? I think those are all important questions to ask in like an enterprise setting, or, you know, in really any business setting, is what kind of data in general, maliciously or not, is being uploaded to these third-party services. Because this is another example, like with Kim's story with the authentication, you're putting it out there. The same thing here with file storage, you're suddenly putting your files somewhere else where you're losing control over them. And I guess you have to be careful, you know, and make sure that you understand that from your enterprise network perspective. How often is that happening?
As far as the controls that they may put in place for, you know, locking this down, I think, you know, either, you know, some type of checksum could be in place on the Firefox side. I know with Oracle, it's hard to, you know, to grab a link or download their from their repository without proper authentication, or, you know, the link itself, you can't get in there. So certain controls may be able to be, you know, be implemented on their side, but I think they just need to investigate more.